Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Kagiyama, and I'd like to welcome everyone here to To Be Your Own Hero. I'm a stage 4 prostate, bone, and lung cancer patient. Been battling cancer for over 2 years. I just recently had a CT scan, and the results were very good. Everything was either better or at the worst the same as before. So things are moving in the right direction. I also have a full body scan actually tomorrow. And once I go through this and the results are good, then what I'm going to propose to my oncologist is that these scans be done just once a year because it's just too much radiation and things like that, which is not good for me. But I do need to know exactly where I stand. So, with that, I am so excited to have an incredible guest, and her name is Monique Pate from Italy. And we're reaching out all over the world. So, at this time, I'd like to bring on my guest, Monique Pate. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me to your podcast and your video. I really am so grateful to be here. Um, as Mark mentioned, my name is Monique Pate. I am a post-cancer revival coach, and I'm also a multiple myeloma survivor.
Fantastic, fantastic. I can't wait to hear your story because if you notice, and I want to point this out, Monique has the greatest smile. Look at that smile. Just
Thank
absolutely
you.
fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So why don't we start this discussion uh, when you got diagnosed with cancer? Can you start taking us on your journey?
Sure. So I was diagnosed in 2014, and it was quite a shock because I didn't have the symptoms. I mean, there was a series of events that happened before I was diagnosed. I was in the U.S. I was visiting my parents during Easter, and I was in a work situation that I was not very happy. There was just a series of events that were going on. And the next thing I know, I wake up one morning the day after I arrived from the US and ended up with this infection in my sciatic nerve. And being one who really didn't like visiting doctors and not really trusting my local doctor, I basically stayed home for a good 2 weeks with fever that was going up and down. Um, then I developed an infection in my right knee. And next thing you know, I am in the emergency room. And, uh, and so once there, I had I mean, I visualized the whole experience. I ended up being hospitalized. To make a long story short, I get the biopsy done, and I ended up being diagnosed with multiple myeloma, and I had no idea what this was. I had never heard of it. My I was anemic, and my levels were completely all over the place. And so then when they did the biopsy, they had suspected that that's what I was, that was what I had. And next thing I know is once the results came back, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma.
What kind of biopsy did you have?
Actually, I had to have it's an extraction from your back, basically near the pelvis. And so it's the lower back. And so basically they go in with the needle, take a bone sample. And once they get it tested, take it to the lab. It resulted that I had multiple myeloma. The interesting thing about it, and I often say that it was a blessing in disguise because of the infection I had in the sciatic nerve, and the infection had nothing to do with the multiple myeloma, but a large part of my hospitalization was because I had this infection, I had this high fever, my levels were off. And so that infection basically led to the diagnosis. And so I certainly, like I said, didn't suffer from any bone lesions. I didn't have any of the characteristics of a person who was suffering from multiple myeloma. So it was a complete surprise, not only to me, but also to my family and friends.
So did you feel at that point, did you feel isolated because you were away from your family and things like that? What was going through your mind as this is happening with you?
It's funny as I when I think about this. When I was hospitalized, I really didn't tell my parents, and I thought, I'm going to go in. They're going to deal with the fever, they're going to deal with this infection, and then I'm going to go home. And so I really held off telling my parents that I was in the hospital. And when I would call, just act as if nothing was happening. And so my parents really did not know, well, they weren't aware I was in the hospital. I broke the news to them on my birthday, only because at that point I couldn't fake it anymore. And I was already 2 weeks in the hospital and I wasn't going
Wow.
home anytime soon. So at that point, I realized that I needed to tell my family, and that was really difficult. Um, and so my I have my family in the US, but living abroad, you also create a family with your friends and with an expat community. And so I would say I had two families. I had the family in Italy and I had my family in the United States.
Wow. So what happened when you actually told them that you were in the hospital? How did that go?
So for my every year on my birthday, my mother sings a song. And so it's Paloma Blancas. Buenos dias, Paloma Blanca. And so she started singing the song, and I had to prepare myself psychologically. I spoke to a friend of mine who was a psychologist prior to telling my parents. And so we did some work to help me have have the courage to tell them. And so when my mom finished singing and she broke out in a Cecilia Cruz version of Happy Birthday, I then proceeded to tell her that I had some news for her, that I was in the hospital. And that was really difficult because my mom at that point broke down in tears and she said, what happened? And I said, I'm waiting for some test results, but I hadn't told them exactly what was the diagnosis. And so then I said, let's just wait and see, what the doctor says and what the test results say. And then, of course, my father was standing nearby and heard her crying and said, what's going on? And so my mom hands the phone to him. And that was really difficult. I even get emotional when I think about it. My father in 2014 was diagnosed with colon cancer, and my world came completely undone. And so I flew home and I was with my dad. So a year later, and thank God he didn't have to do any chemo. They caught it early enough, and so then he didn't have to have any kind of follow-up treatments. And so a year later, I ended up diagnosed. And so when he came on the phone, I kept it together, but I was just dying inside. And so I
Oh,
explained to him, this is what's happening. And I said, let's just wait and see what the results are. And and when his voice cracked, that I kept it together on the phone. and afterwards I just kind of lost it after I hung up with him. And it was just it was very difficult to tell them, first of all, and also just I've always been a very I'm my parents' easiest child, let's put it that way. And so then I at that point entered a it was a psychological struggle, because I felt and I perceived that I was now creating trouble for them by getting sick. And so a large part of my cancer journey was really working through this image that we take on in a family, or this role that we take on in a family. And it really hit me face to face when I fell ill.
So I, that is unbelievably difficult because I know how close you are to your parents, and you're very, very close. So you're telling them what's going on. What is your mindset as far as dealing with your diagnosis at that point?
I think we all go through that first stage of denial. And so then I thought, no, wait a minute, they must have made a mistake. The test results are wrong. And I immediately wanted to get a second opinion and even a third opinion. And so the initial reaction was definitely of shock. But also when the doctors came into the room to tell me, I remember the scene. I was just lying in bed, and they came in and they said, we've got your test results. And I just looked at them and I said, do I have cancer? That's all I wanted to know. And they just, I think they were taken aback by my response. And they said, yes, you do, but it's treatable. And so then at that point, they had said, if you have any questions, we're here for you. They were very supportive. And I remember prior to having the biopsy, my doctors had said, don't go on the internet. They wrote it on a piece of paper what it was. They said, don't go on the internet. Let's get the test results done first, and then then you're free to look up whatever information. And I did. I didn't go to the internet, because sometimes I think that when you're diagnosed, there's so much information, and it can be so overwhelming, that I thought, okay. But again, because I was just like, well, we'll see what the biopsy says. And in my mind, it was just like, I've got this infection in my sciatic nerve and in my knee, and I'll be home in a few days. So yeah, it was the denial and shock was my reaction.
So I could completely understand where you're at. So once you accepted the fact that you did have cancer, what was your mindset moving forward? What did you want to do, and how were you gonna approach that mentally?
So immediately, I had this moment where I had a dialogue with myself in the mirror. And I don't know if anyone has seen the 25th Hour. There's that scene with Edward Norton. It's a Spike Lee film where he's having this dialogue with himself. And I remember going into the bathroom and looking at myself and forgiving myself for getting sick, first of all, and trying to figure out how did I get here? That was my thought, was how did I get here, and how was I going to get myself out of this situation? And so, you start thinking about your diet. You start thinking, you start thinking about, okay, um, did I bring this upon myself? Um, I've always been a vegetarian. And so I thought, it's not possible that the diet could have played a factor. And when I started reflecting, when I look back now in retrospect, there was a series of stressful events that were going on in my life. I was hired as a principal for an international school in Switzerland. I I took the job to make other people happy, and I wasn't quite convinced about taking that position and working for the company that hired me. So there was these chain of events that happened prior, and the only word I could use to describe myself at that moment was that I became unplugged. When you pull the socket, when you pull the plug out of the socket, I just felt like this is, my body just fell apart. And so at that point, once I had the diagnose, my next step was to get a second opinion and then plan for a third opinion. And so those were the first steps that I was taking. And then the second step was thinking, okay, what changes do we need to make in our diet? What changes do we need to make in our lifestyle? So, there are all these thoughts that one is racing with at that moment, because you're trying to do everything to save yourself, and you enter that fight and flight moment. It's often said that people, in the cancer on the cancer journey, is in survivor mode, but I really don't think that's the case at all. I think you are in a fight or flight, because that is how you are monitoring your situation of getting through what's going on.
So one question that I have is, how similar is the way they would treat your cancer, multiple myeloma, in Italy as opposed to the US?
Well, there's a standard procedure. So the standard procedure is that you do 4 cycles. I did 4 cycles of chemo, but I'm assuming that that is the standard procedure, which is, and then after you've done that, you collect your stem cells. You collect your stem cells, and if that is possible for you, because again, that also depends on a series of factors, and then you actually have the stem cell transplant. And so
Did
those
did
are,
did you do that? Did you have a
I
stem cell
did.
transplant?
I did have a
Wow.
stem cell transplant, and
Wow.
there was a lot of resistance on my behalf. I had, just to kind of back up a second, the biopsy, after the first biopsy, I had 80% of my plasma cells were cancerous in the
Wow.
bone marrow. So that's 80%.
Wow.
And so, and again, when you're given that diagnosis, you're like, wow, that's high. That's very high. And so once I got my second opinion and then got my third opinion, and because I was diagnosed, I had streptococcus, the infection in my back and in my right knee. I had to do 16 weeks of antibiotics, and one doctor wanted me to start the chemotherapy immediately. And I was just like, whoa, wait a minute. I need to get my body at a good place because it has gone through a shock, and I need to get it in a in a working place. And so, being that I'm on antibiotics, I had been in the hospital for a month. I had, you're on all these meds, and I was just like, wait a minute. And so, with the second doctor I saw, uh, he was just kind of like, no, you've got to do it. There's no if, and, or buts. And I just said, no, we're going to wait, and I'm going to give my body time to heal. The third doctor in Milan was wonderful because he said, no, no, let's just get you through the antibiotics. Let's get this infection out of the way, and then we will start you on the therapy. So I had to do. I'm going to make sure I'm pronouncing it right because I think of the Italian. But Valcade. Valcade was one of the medications that I had to take for the chemo, which is an injection, and then thalidomide, which was another set of pills. But this procedure is pretty standard, from what I understand, for the type of the type of multiple myeloma I had.
Wow. So let's move forward in your journey. So how were things progressing once you got past that stage? And when did you realize that you turned a corner?
I turned. It's interesting because I had uh, I had complications during my transplant. And so, like I said, it's a standard procedure. So doctors are like, boom, 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 this is what you do. And I ended up I was in a life and death situation. I ended up getting engraftment syndrome, which basically means that my body rejected my stem cells. And so I had, when I say everything happened, everything happened. The doctors weren't prepared for it because it's not something that they had encountered. And so, if when one asks, what was the turning point? The turning point was that moment where you're fighting for your life. And so, what what helped me was definitely having whether one believes in God or in the universe or whatever, at that moment, you just entrust your faith in your belief. And that, because that's all I had at that moment. And so that is what helped me get through it. And of course, I mean, my parents were there. I had a strong support community. I had the doctors and the nurses who were rallying for me in a very critical moment. Because what had happened was that uh, I had the sensation of having going into cardiac arrest, and
Wow.
so and so like I said, it's that moment where everything shifts, everything changes, and I say it's me and God at that point because that's all there really is. So that for me, I would say, became the turning point.
I have a one of my moderators on Cancer Conquering Community. His name is Boyd Dunleavy, and he's an amazing guy, and he runs marathons, and he's but what he says is, he says, I have a guy, and my guy, his name is Jesus. So yeah, I always think of that when somebody mentions that. But
Mhm.
I mean, I completely understand what you are saying and the mindset that you were at that point. And so I just think that I interview so many people, and what's always fascinating to me is how similar the characteristics are
Mhm.
of people who do make it and
Mhm.
who are successful, and it's blows my mind, absolutely
Mhm.
blows my mind. In fact, um, I always refer to the book Radical Remissions. I don't know if you've read that book
No,
by Kelly Turner. It's a great book, and she cites 9 characteristics of people who've had successful cancer journeys, and they're
Mhm.
just so strikingly similar, and they just keep coming up over and over and over again. And I see those characteristics
Mhm.
in what you're telling me as well. So I mean that is truly, truly awesome. And there goes that smile again. So your parents actually came,
Yes,
flew over to Italy and were at your side.
yes, yeah,
That
yeah, yeah.
is fantastic. How long were
Mhm.
they with you in Italy?
They stayed for 3 months.
Wow.
They stayed for 3 months. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had asked them to wait until I had made the decision to have the stem cell transplant because I had once I started my treatments, I started juicing. I started making some changes within my diet, which meant eating more greens. Um, I was still a vegetarian at the time, and so I was trying to pay a little bit more attention. Not that my diet was bad, but just paying a little bit more attention to adding more vegetables, limiting uh, fruits, reducing fruits, and no dairy. So just really followed a pretty intense diet, and the results were amazing. After I did the 4 cycles, I went from 80% to 8%. And
Wow.
so, it was a combination. Someone may ask, well, maybe, it was just the meds, but I'm like, no, it's a combination of all of these things because they all play a huge factor in improving your health. And I think something that's really important is that, we talk about diet, but at the end of the day, it depends on what your body really needs. And I think that's the fine line of those things.
I think what's fascinating is there's no one way to, get to the ultimate goal of, you know, getting better, remission, uh,
Mhm.
NED, whatever you want to call it, is, but there's a lot of similarities in people's journeys to get there.
Yeah.
And so that's the fascinating thing to me is I've done certain things that you haven't done, but you've done certain things that I haven't done,
Mhm.
and yet we still are able to uh, make the same destination,
Mhm.
which is really fantastic. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of similarities, and it's this journey is not a one size fits all.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
and,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So true.
that's the beautiful thing about it. and
Mhm. Mhm.
and what I'd like to do at this time, I am so interested in finding out more about your journey. And so I'd like to invite you back for a second interview if you're up to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to. I would love to.
And so why don't we, at this time, why don't you share with us up until this point, what is the thing that you would like to share with our audience as far as, up until this point
Mhm. Mhm.
for you?
Okay. One thing I wanted to share in reference to my parents, and then I'll answer your question. My parents, who I absolutely adore, in a moment of such difficulty, and my parents will be celebrating their 60th anniversary this year.
Oh,
Um,
wow. That's fantastic. That is so awesome.
in such a critical moment, I mean, I really saw what it meant to be a people of faith. And that was the thing that really stood out to me about my parents, that their faith, their unity in such a difficult moment. And the fact that, I don't have kids, but I really saw the love that my parents have. Not only, I mean, I have two other siblings, but really saw the love that my parents and the sacrifice that a parent is prepared to really do anything and everything possible to make sure that their children are safe. And I am forever, I am forever thankful to my parents. They're extraordinary people, and I don't have I don't have words to describe how amazing my parents are.
That is beautiful. And I feel this exact same way. I mean, uh, my dad has passed, he's passed about 3 years or something like that. No, it was in 2021, 22, about a year and a half now. But my mother is just, you know, has been there every step of the way. In fact, she is the biggest fan of my channel. I mean, she watches the videos and makes a comment, and so she's done, so much. I mean, everything for me, and for that, I really appreciate that, and I know she'll see this. So yeah, I feel exactly the same way. And you were going to add to that, um, beyond that, Monique.
Yes.
You were
Yes,
going to
yes,
add
yes.
something after that. You were going to say.
Yes. So I was going to share that the whole cancer experience, and I think for many of us, when that happens, it becomes a life-changing experience. And you're also aware that, you can't go back to what your previous life was. You could only move forward. So the it falls into when I found myself in that critical moment of survival. In the back of my mind, I just said, I get through this, and I will dedicate my life's work to helping people living with cancer. And that becomes that turning point. So having the experience of, eating a certain way, listening to conversations in the lounge. And there was a woman in particular that really, she always comes to the forefront because we were talking about, what to eat, what not to eat. And there was just this massive confusion and uncertainty about what exactly, you put in your body, and having to deal with her, bless her, her anxiety of having to have the treatments. And so just kind of listening to people and looking at my experience and what other people were going through, it began to really shape the direction that I wanted to go. So I went and pursued certifications in nutrition and in coaching, and did my training. And now I dedicate my work to empowering women recovering after cancer thrive. So that is where my energy is has moved towards.
That is so fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us here on To Be Your Own Hero. And we're going to bring you back for part 2 to learn out more about your journey. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, Monique. It's been fantastic. And with that, I'd like to, what I do with all my videos now is I share a couple of positive quotes that I share with everybody till next week. And the first quote is from Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, and both of them are actually. And he says, it's always too soon to quit. And then the second quote is, help other people to cope with their problems, and your own will be easier to cope with. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you so much, Monique. Thank everyone for joining us here at the Be Your Own Hero. And let's make 2023 absolutely incredible. Let's keep it going. Let's make a difference in people's lives. And because you never know what somebody else is going through, uh, brighten up somebody's day. Say hello. Make a, uh, you know, help them, help somebody across the street who's having a hard time walking. Do what you can within your. I have somebody, Terry Lynn Ranella. She gives flowers to people, to strangers, and her company's called Terry's Flowers. So do whatever you can within your abilities to help make somebody else's day better. And with that, I'd like to share, make the most out of every single day, every single hour, every single minute, and every single breath. Let's make this world a better place for all of us. And it takes an effort by everyone. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here at To Be Your Own Hero. And we will see you next week, same time, same bat channel, same bat station. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.